Webinar. Welcome. I'm Perry Romanowski, the chair of the Education Committee for the IFSCC. With me is Mary Lynn Hallen. She is the secretariat of the IFSCC, and she pretty much makes sure everything keeps running properly.
That's my job.
We have John Staton. I'm going to do an introduction to John properly, but he's all the way out there in Sydney. He's going to be our speaker today. If you have a question, feel free to post that question in the chat room there. And we're going to do a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. Usually that's about 20 minutes long. The presentation goes about 40 minutes, and then we'll take questions up to the top of the hour. You may or may not get all your questions answered, but if you get your question in early, you have a better chance of getting it answered. Okay, that looks like without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Mary Lynn, and she's going to give us a little bit of info about the IFSCC.
Okay, thanks, Perry. So what is the IFSCC? It stands for the International Federation of Societies of Cosmetic Chemists. Right now, we just got our 50th society. We're very excited. The Nigerian Society joined us in November. So welcome to them. We are dedicated to international cooperation in cosmetic science and technology. And to find the society in your country, if you're not already a member, go to ifscc.org. and click on member societies. A quick overview of the individual membership benefits you would receive after you join your local society, then you automatically become an IFSCC member. There's no extra charge. You get our quarterly digital IFSCC magazine. Cosmet.com is our online cosmetic science database with almost 100,000 different items, papers, podiums from our conferences, all the posters from our conferences, you name it. We have a virtual library at ifscc.org with reference books, including some of Perry's, textbooks, articles, all the podiums and posters from our congresses and conferences since 1995. And that's where you can find the recordings from these webinars. You have the opportunity to win prizes at our conferences and congresses. We host on-site educational programs once there's no COVID, and you get discounted registration to our Congress and conferences. You always save more money than it costs to join your local society. So your membership pays for itself. So that's us, IFSCC for One World of Beauty.
Well, thank you so much, Mary Lynn. All right, John, are you excited to get started here?
Absolutely.
All right, let me give you a little bit of an introduction so people know who is speaking. John Staton has 50 years of experience in the pharmaceutical and healthcare industries, including 20 years directly involved in sun protection product testing. John is a life member of the ASCC and serves in a number of industries representative roles with the ASMI, Accord, and Standards. He is the Australian representative to the ISO Committee on Sunscreen Testing, TC 217, which is the Committee of Development of Sunscreen Standards, and he's a member of the CS 042 Standards Australia Committee for Sunscreen Test Development. And today's talk is going to be about SPF testing. Let's get those slides going. And without further ado, John, you can take it away.
Thank you, Perry. Good morning, evening, everyone, and thank you for attending. If you like to make sure that you send your questions, I'm very keen to answer questions to clarify anything that may come up in the presentation or general information regarding sunscreen testing. Happy to field anything there. So let's get underway. And it was only this week that some information was published in New Zealand, again highlighting the issue of the conflict that appears mostly seasonally in each market. Ours in our Australian beginning of our summer, and conversely in the Northern Hemisphere summers where particularly consumer groups hot to trot in regards to independent testing of sunscreens to evaluate their efficacy. So it's not only just this one instance, but there are many, many examples of this sort of approach to comparative testing, which of course is not highlighted by sponsors, but it is particularly highlighted by consumer organisations. So I'm sure you're all familiar with those in different markets. Most recently, again, in Hong Kong, there were some numbers, and US, UK, Australia are very active every season in producing these kinds of figures. So I hope what I address today will explain maybe how we can better address this and prevent it happening. And it might be a little controversial for some people, but those who've heard me before would be aware that I'm really prominent in pushing this issue along. So what happens is that the bad news comes not so much from those consumer magazines, which tend to be subscription and fairly low distribution comparatively, but of course the press releases end up in the media. And so we end up in a situation where we have to respond as sponsors of products to this kind of media hyped up information that appears very quickly once those reports have been published. But the worst news, of course, is when it gets beyond that, and that again happened most recently in the consumer reports from New Zealand, which then were transferred to their Commerce Commission, which is essentially a legal control on claims in that marketplace. And not only that, but the information, because of our close association between Australia and New Zealand, and the fact that we do share a standard, the Australian-New Zealand standard, that was reflected in some action that was taken by TGA, the Australian regulator of therapeutics in Australia, and the equivalent to the FDA here. So you need to be aware, obviously, that Australia has regulations of sunscreens, primary sunscreens as therapeutics. So here's where things get a little bit gnarly, and we really need to be on our feet. And my suggestion is not have our heads in the sand. So what I'll cover in this is what I suggest is what you should be expecting from a formulation in terms of predictability of the SPF. And then I'll talk about defining the SPF, particularly in the way that it's been repositioned within the ISO, and interpreting the results, which is the most important issue if you're a sponsor, because you can't necessarily rely totally on the independent lab's results to be confident about your substantiated claim. Then I'm going to talk about improvements to the ISO method, which was something I covered in detail in my previous presentation. And then, of course, to the gnarly question of who's right and who is wrong. So that's where we're going to go in the next 35 minutes or so. So let me cover first what you should be expecting. And I'm giving you some figures which have been published in various forums, mainly in scientific conferences. This one in particular came from an IFSCC conference in Florida when this information was presented. And what I'm suggesting is there are predictable performance criteria for actives. And I like to talk in terms of bangs for your buck. So I talk about something called SPF yield. And the SPF yield is calculated and published by the manufacturers of the raw materials. And what I'm suggesting is, in general terms, the combination of actives that you would use in a sunscreen formulation could be predicted to give you a general kind of target figure, a mid-pointy figure of around 2, a value of 2 SPF units for each 1% that are used in the formula. So you can see on that chart, by the way, the ones that are marked in green are the US available actives, and those the rest of them are those that are covered in Europe and EU and the rest of the markets that are regulated. So what we're talking about is just a general principle of about 2 bangs for your buck. We're aware, of course, of the opportunity to look at prediction again from online tools, which are provided by several suppliers of the actives. And these are useful because we can find some synergy from the combination. But I think the point about the synergy is you can go so far and then you get to the question of, is this really right, or are these guys being a little conservative in what they're estimating? But the first point is combination of actives can make a difference, and certainly the yield can be increased in those examples. You can see a very poor yield from a content of actives giving you a yield of 0.86 to a yield of 245. But still, we're in the bounds of what I suggest is 2 something. Let's have a look now at some of the published data. And the first example I'll give you is ISO standards. And recently, we reissued a new version of ISO, which included some more standards, P5, P6, P8. And all of these were evaluated in ring studies. And the mean yield from these would be indicative of the typical range that I suggest from the theoretical. So again, we're talking somewhere around 2. A few years ago, maybe only 4, but there may be improvements on this. I published this list reviewing formulations which had been provided in the public domain by various suppliers of raw materials, and these are what we'd call commonly your starting formulas. And you can see again the mean of these still sitting in the 2. And by the way, the one that was that's shown as the highest there, the maximum, in fact contains a sunscreen booster, which is known to have a UV absorption value of its own. So it's a little bit exaggerating the content of actives. You should be adding another 5% of that booster to that particular formula, so that in fact it's underrepresenting the true UV contribution from those actives. I looked on our TGA listings. Again, this is a little updated now, but from an N of 77 at the time of the first 50 products to be listed as 50 and above when TGA moved to that new level. And you could see there's a histogram showing the fact that the majority of the products are still in our 2 to 3 bracket, and then there are a few outliers. Keep in mind this is claimed actives versus listed percentage of actives, so it's actually the SPF claimed, not something that I've personally tested. So where's the worst scenario in terms of an example of what I believe to be an overestimated SPF? And these are at the way end high of those TGA listings. These are the highest numbers I could find. And here you have a product with 6% of actives claiming SPF 50 plus, which means it was claiming on the test 60. Therefore, the yield is 10. And I would suggest, as you'll see later, a flag would fly, a red flag would fly in that situation, in my estimation. And then there's another example where the yield is 5 to 6, 11% of actives. So these are the end point of the claims in terms of registered products, products that are on the TGA listing. The question is, are these real or are they not correct? So I took again some examples from the USA from a consumer.org test results. And again, the products that they said passed fitted pretty well within the same range. I might say that the products that they failed fitted beyond that range. And you'd be familiar with those products. They're usually available from their website. So my suggestion is, in terms of what SPF you should expect, that it is fairly realistic for a lotion or a cream, in other words, something that has about 50% water, 50% oil phase, including the actives, then you would be looking at reviewing anything carefully, my suggestion, if you find a yield that's starting to creep above a range of 3 units per percentage of actives. So how do we define the target? My concern with suggesting to a lab is that there is very strong evidence of bias if the lab is given a specific target. There's evidence of one particular lab at present that's has legal issues in court at present related to overestimation of claims, and my interpretation from seeing many of their reports, probably 60 I've reviewed, is that if they set a target, they achieve the target. So I suggest there's a bias to target very strongly with several test labs that I've reviewed. So what happened in the example from the ring studies that we conducted at ISO was that we found when we gave the value, in this case it was an unblinded reference sunscreen, that they could achieve very close to the mark of the target SPF. However, when we compared with blinded SPF, we get quite different results. So here's results for an example of a ring study that I've extrapolated from ISO, when the SPF has been given to them as the target, in other words, P2, and then when it was exposed separately, it was found to be way out of the variability of the expected result range. This was brought to the head in an FDA submission and choice consumer report going back to 2018, which I previously discussed in my my June presentation. So what's the issue? The issue is that the MED has now been defined in most of the regulation that's applied around the planet now, but it hasn't been quantified properly until fairly recently, and that is within ISO that we now have a quantitated definition of the erythemal response rather than just a qualitative one. And if you refer to that, you'll see again in my previous presentation some details on that. However, the FDA has a little broader permission of the definition of the erythemal response. So we still see differences in results between FDA testing and the new ISO testing. Up until we had results in ISO reviewed, and we recently reissued a new version of ISO, there was a term for reporting the ISO results which has not been properly tied down, and that's now been addressed very strongly in the new versions of ISO. They relate to the information on the relationship between skin types and erythema, and this I've covered in my previous presentation in quite a bit of depth. So when the erythema is projected and calculated, the results are that the average would be within pretty good confidence intervals. There's a relationship between the sun and the solar simulator, which can be applied actually to the issue of the calibration of your solar simulator. And the relationship is strongly applied when we're using the instruments that's used for the calibration of the solar simulator erythemometer, or the radiometer that's used in the testing of the products. So you can get an indication of the range, and you could get you can review the MED dose when the report is provided. So solar simulators will generally give you a range between 100 and 150 MEDs per hour. If you're interpreting SPF lab results, then you will find, and here I use an example of two reports, one which from Lab A, we'll call it, and the other from Lab B. And you can see in general terms, the products are actually the same general SPF. So if you just take the typical approach to testing results, where you look at the SPF report, you might think, okay, that's good. Lab A and Lab B are getting the same results. But in fact, if we just take one example of a test subject, and I've selected here from what's a type 2 skin, and then start to compare those, and I'll just move those down so you can see the values. The results for the MED for the protected skin are quite different. They're showing 931 seconds to 24 seconds, even though if you look at the SPF result for unprotected skin, it looks to be reasonable. Okay, so let's start now to look at those numbers in terms of interpretation. So here we have Lab A that's showing us a value of 19 seconds versus Lab B, which has shown a value of 4 seconds. If we then start to look at the intensity of the two examples, then Lab A is actually running more or less the same intensity of their solar simulator as for Lab B. And yet we're getting quite a different result. So if we try and relate it to the sun and compare sunlight, real sunlight, and let's say we take a figure which is fairly typical of around 10 minutes for an MED, then that value is 6 MEDs per hour. So 60 minutes divided by 10 is 6 MEDs per hour. And you would look again at the two results and see that lab A is showing you an intensity of around 125 MEDs per hour, and lab B is showing you much the same. So again, you would think, well, they're comparable tests. However, when you look at the number of seconds for an MED in the example of lab A, it is 19 seconds, and for lab B, it is only 4 seconds. So something seems to be amiss here. So let's try and calculate those numbers. And what you'll see is that the 19 seconds lab A times 21 intensity, because we're looking at 125 MEDs per hour on the simulator versus 6 MEDs per hour for, let's say, our 10 minutes. We're talking about a figure of 21 times sun intensity. So what that means is that if we divided the intensity and calculated it, we would find that lab A is reporting 19,551 seconds intensity for an SPF of 49. However, lab B is showing an intensity of the same, but only 56 seconds. So it's 56 times. So it's 4,704 seconds protection. So something seems to be amiss between a protection for the product, theoretically, of nearly 20,000 seconds, and lab B, which is only 5. So we now move to trying to understand what's going on. And in the case of lab A, those calculations arrive at a ratio which shows you a protection at maximum intensity of 5.4 hours. Of course, we don't get maximum intensity all day, but if you extrapolate it out, it more or less is all day protection, which you would expect from that amount of an SPF of around 50. So if you look then at lab B, it's 1.3 hours, and it is actually not in line with the results that you get from lab A or from the results that you would get in the sun compared with the lab results that they're reflecting. So there's a need to look beyond the SPF number to understand what the hell's going on. So what we did with ISO is we created some improvements to ISO which allow you to hone in not so much on the SPF, but to hone in on the MED. So here we're looking at an issue that arose when we were looking at ISO ring studies. If you use ITAs only and do not use the MED values that are based on instrumental measurement, but you use the Fitzpatrick type on the left-hand side versus an ITA on the right-hand side, you can see that it's really difficult to extrapolate a relationship between the MED and the skin color as measured instrumentally by a spectrophotometer. So what in fact happens is that we get confusion over Fitzpatrick types. So you can see the plot on the left shows you 3 fit lines, whereas the plot on the right, which is ITA values, gives you a much better relationship. So ISO guidance says now no Fitzpatrick, but to use ISO based measurement on the ITA value, which is with a spectrophotometer, and we report it now in a standardized value. This is what it looks like in a report where you've now removed the Fitzpatrick types and you have a linear expression. So you can see a relationship directly between skin type and the skin response in joules. So this is what's been applied to the new ISO standard. And in fact, if we look at the report format of those standards, we'll find that it is now expressed in the watts per meter squared efficient. So the erythema has an energy value to it. It also has seconds and it has joules, which is the energy value times time. In other words, the dose. So this is now a mandatory part of normative requirement for ISO. So the question now is who was right and who was wrong in terms of interpreting those reports. Here's an example I gave of many results, 12 labs that I surveyed for the ISO purposes, and it was actually presented to ISO for consideration in how we decided to improve the expression of the dose in terms of the new ISO standard. This is 12 out of 26 labs that were surveyed, and only 12 had sufficient data. So who's right, who's wrong? The question has come up many, many times, not just in the issues of the results that you see from the various consumer bodies, but also in different results in lab tests. And this is this is published data from a report that 5 CROs provided to a supplier of raw material, and given quite different values. So the question is, do you consider just only the SPF when you're looking at the report, or should you really be looking at the other data? My suggestion is that you be aware of the new requirements for the ISO 2444 2019, and that results in the expression quantitatively of the dose applied. And in the case of this example, which is something published fairly recently, the issue was that the two labs, 3 labs on the left-hand side, this is a mean of the 3, were showing typically these low results of a very small amount of dose applied to respond as the MED, compared with the labs on the right, and this again is the mean of 3. Which the authors challenged in terms of confusion over whether this was part of the lab inter-lab variability or in fact was misinterpretation of the endpoint. And my suggestion is that it's very obviously a misinterpretation of the endpoint. So looking at this in terms of the doses that were applied, and again, this is in my previous slide, previous presentation, then you will see huge variability in relation to the MED for unprotected skin between laboratories, inter-lab between laboratories. And so the question then is, who is right and who is wrong? My suggestion is the fit line that we've interpreted now into ISO is that dotted line. So it's about 250 joules per meter squared should be the target for the type 2 skin example that's given here. But the numbers there are results of different labs, and you can see there's quite a difference. So in conclusion, you should look beyond just the SPF. My suggestion is when you see lab reports, focus more on the MED and make sure that the doses that have been applied are in that range, and that range is somewhere between 150 and 350 joules, according to the skin type. And the second point is related to the yield in units per percentage active, and these should be not too pessimistic if you're talking about above a yield of 3, and ensure that you really look hard at the results and the individual data. As I said, it is in the results themselves. Now, if you look at a standardized normative report from ISO, then the information is there, should be there in more than just an SPF number. So in ISO 24444 new version, we've focused on improving the reproducibility, and the report quality should give you that, it should reflect that. So therein's the question to address. And coming back to the example, just so you know, the lab I exampled on that model was Lab G, and it is well down on the list of the expression of the MED unprotected in this case. So in conclusion, look beyond the SPF report, calculate the dose in joules and make sure that's showing on your report. The yield should be around about 2 to 3 units in my experience, and again it will vary quite a bit depending on dose form. Certainly non-aqueous products will have a higher yield, but the general run of a product for emulsions, typically 50% water, typically 50% water and 50% oil phase, is around 2 to 3, and above that would be optimistic. So ISO gives you the tool to improve the reproducibility. It's up to you to make sure that you look for that in the reports. That is my presentation.
So let's get some of those questions here. First of all, a real quick one. Could you repeat the meaning of the MEDP-P3?
The MED is the protected MED, so it's effectively the SPF. You would just subtract one value unit for the fact that you get a 1 value from your MEDU. So to calculate the SPF is really taking the protected value, dividing it by the MED for the unprotected. That gives you the SPF, but you should minus the 1 for the theoretical, if you like, the blank value, the unprotected value.
Okay. Irene stayed on this whole time. She's got this question. Does the ISO standard take into consideration UVA protection?
The ISO standard is for, the SPF is ISO 24444, but for 24443 and 24442 is where you will find the UVA requirements. But in most markets, at least 60 countries, you require compliance with 24444 and both or one of 24443 and 2. So they're your UVA. One's in vivo, one's in vitro.
Okay. Sophia wanted some clarification. So if an independent lab comes back with a low SPF value that's lower than the one claimed on the bottle, does that mean that the product is falsely marketed, or there's some lab discrepancy problem?
In the first instance, it's obviously lab discrepancies, but what I would do is to look carefully at the data that, as I suggested, that you look further than the SPF and have a look carefully at particularly the MED.
Okay, yeah, it was a very interesting breakdown of the data and what you can find. Elaine says, when you talk about boosters, do you refer only to the molecules that absorb or reflect the UV radiation, or do you include things like emollients and better solubilizers for UV filters?
Yeah, a lot of excipients have an impact. So the first thing is that the impact of some boosters works quite differently. There are products which scatter the light, so they effectively increase the light path, such as, example, glass beads. They will actually disrupt the light path and expand it. There are some which are almost disguised actives, I might say, because they're actually UV absorbers. They have chromophores on them, so they do contribute to the SPF, even though they're not formally recognised as actives. I exampled one of those back in the example about published formulas, where one of those examples is included.
Okay, great. Baz wants to know, is it possible one day to get the SPF value via in vitro testing only by using a device? So do you see that coming?
I think the methodology is improving. There are 2 new standards coming within ISO, which are instrumentally based, and one in particular has great promise and universality. They're in development stages. They're at now at the CD stage at least. So you can look for those next year. One is promoted from Europe. The other is promoted essentially from development within some test labs and independent labs in the US. And they're supported by specific instruments designed for better predictability of in vitro SPF.
Very interesting. Now, speaking of the ISO standards, Syed wants to know, has the AU, has Australia and New Zealand adopted the ISO 2444 2019 standard?
It's at the point now of public comment. It will be published, I think, in the first 3 months of 2021. So the comment closes shortly in Australia, and it will be considered by the committee as the final draft for distribution. So it's a draft standard in the end of January of 2021.
Okay, look for that. Chelsea says, why is the intensity of the solar lamps not regulated?
Well, it is regulated within the standard. It's not regulated by any particular regulatory body, but it's specified within the standard. And their limitations on the intensity relate actually to the total dose of all of the light that's is coming from the light source. So if you have a solar simulator that's too intense, it will heat the skin, so that becomes very obvious. You'll get an erythemal burn instead of a UV burn. Mm-hmm. And so we've specified both in the ISO standard and in the US FDA standard limitations for the total intensity. But keep in mind, we filter that down because we're dealing only with the UV region of the lamp source. The rest is mostly filtered out. But if your intensity is too high, you get an erythemal burn, not a UV erythemal response.
Interesting. Jordan says, could you comment on the reliability of SPF results when you're considering mineral filters?
Yes, mineral filters have an issue of yield variability, which relates to their particle size and distribution. So just an example, zinc oxide, if you used a USP BP grade, you would get a yield of about 0.5 bangs for your buck. So for every 1% in, you're only getting a half an SPF unit, whereas the nanoparticle will give you up to 2. So there's a big difference just in the particle size distribution impact. So we're talking about here that, let's say 10% of course, zinc oxide will only give you 5. 10% of nano will give you around 20 or slightly above 20.
Wow, that's a big difference. Aaron wants to know, they say they see big differences in SPF results when it's tested in the US versus China using exactly the same formulas. Any ideas why that might happen?
In the US, I'd be looking at the exercise that I just went through. Hopefully you got most of it. But essentially come back to the MED and look how, in relation to the SPF, how it relates to the ratio of the two is not really the question. The question is how reliable is the MED value.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good point. We just have a few more questions. Thank you so much for staying over, and we apologize to everybody for the technical difficulties. And Elisa says, does the lab bias in measuring the SPF happen also with the ISO 24444 2019 standard?
If it's followed to the letter, no. Intention was to actually eliminate that bias and try and block out any underestimation of MED. However, you know, an issue of fraud is not the same, and I'm sure most of us are aware of an issue now with one lab in particular. So a standard really can't protect from falsification or misinterpretation of results.
Yeah, that is a big challenge. We just have 2 more questions that we'll cover. Chelsea says, John, what is your opinion of the newer HDRS methods of determining SPF?
Yeah, sure. Very, very enthusiastic supporter of that method. It looks very promising. It is universal. In other words, it's not dose form dependent. And also it looks like it will allow us to predict the SPF and UVA all in one method procedure. And as well, because it's still applied to skin, but it's not invasive. The doses are very low. In fact, they're well under 1 MED for just even for product. Then it means that it's much safer, and it will also allow for water resistance testing, because you can still dunk the volunteers into their pleasant spa.
Excellent. All right, looks like Cynthia, I'll get the last question. Since she says, is there an adequate intensity of the solar lamp for this test?
The intensity of the solar lamp is generally only either 150 watts or 300 watts. And the output is the question, because it's a multiple. So around 20 times sunlight is more or less its safe limit. And if you go beyond that, then you will get erythemal burn.
Good point. Well, John, that looks like we wrapped it up. Thank you so much for staying over. Sorry for the technical difficulties. And thank you, everybody, for staying online and participating in these IFSCC webinars all year. We look forward to seeing you next year. There's Gavin. Hello, Gavin. And Mary Lynn. Hello. Mary Lynn, any last words before we sign off?
Ooh, no, but remember when you proposed this, our webinars to the Presidium at the beginning of the year, you said, oh, let's try 1 a quarter, see if anyone shows up.
We did.
Turns out people show up.
Gavin, you have any last words before we sign off?
Actually, it's a wonderful experience to see so many people participating in this webinar, and I really look forward to be part of the future webinar. And your comment, your feedback is very valuable for us to prepare more of this content for everyone.
Yes.
So thank you everyone for joining.
Okay, thanks everybody. Happy holidays, and we will see you next year.
Yes, and let's hope it's a better one.
Everyone.
That's it. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All the best.
Yes.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another IFSCC webinar. This is actually our last webinar of the year. Can you believe it?
Yes, it is. And it's number 16?
Number 16, and
Okay.
we've got on a favorite. John, you were one of the highest trafficked webinars that we've had all year. So congrats on that. We got 3 people online. Hello, if you're just joining us, feel free to post there in the chat and tell us hello and let us know where you're from. We always like to know where people are from. I am located in Chicago, USA. Maryland, where are you located?
New York City.
And John,
I'm in sunny Sydney, Australia.
John, you're actually in the future right now, because right now for me it's Tuesday.
John to the future.
Yeah, John is already in the future. Welcome. We're going to get started in about 10 minutes. Fascinating talk today about SPF testing. Some updated information too. So very, very interesting. John, there was that some sunscreen was in the news recently about what was it? The Perito sunscreen. Did you hear about this news?
I heard from some in New Zealand.
Yes, that was it.
I mentioned those in my presentation.
Oh, okay.
I didn't get into specific brands.
Gotcha. Well, I only mentioned it. It was in the news, but I guess the idea was that some investigative reporting went on. They took samples of a certain brand, they tested it, and they demonstrated that they didn't meet the claims of their labeling. Very interesting story going on about sunscreens. But so I think what's that?
Tuned, you'll get lots more.
Yeah, that is going to be covered. So we are that is how up to date we are, because that just broke last week, if I recall correctly. All right, we are going to get started in just about 9 minutes. Hello, welcome. This is the IFSCC webinar. Today we have John Staton, and we have our first person checking in.
Oh, hi, Susanna.
Susanna from Buenos Aires.
Hi, Susanna.
Every time she checks in, I always say, "Boy, I'd love to go to Buenos Aires."
2022. I just heard this today. Is the FLASC conference? It was supposed to be this year. It's supposed to be 2021. They're going to do 2021 virtually, and then for real in Buenos Aires in 2022. And I bet you, Perry, the Spring Presidium meeting will be held in conjunction with that, so you will be forced to attend.
Oh, darn. Well, we got Philip checking in from Singapore. Hello, Philip. Susanna Clark, she's saying hello. Pamela from Indonesia. And then we have Golton from Cincinnati, Ohio. I did a webinar this morning with Phil Guys from Cincinnati, Ohio. He lives in Florida now, but he was a longtime preservative guy for Procter & Gamble. So it's fascinating. Lots of questions about preservatives there. Oh, we got somebody from my father's native land of Poland. That's Alexandra.
Your father?
My father came over from Poland right after the war. Last name Romanowski. That's where.
Wow.
Yeah. And, it turns out he ended up in Chicago, and Chicago happened at one point had the highest population of Polish people in any city outside of Warsaw. So there you go. So there's actually an avenue here in Chicago called Milwaukee Avenue, which featured a lot of Polish restaurants and shops. Very interesting. All right, we are going to get started in just, 7 minutes, according to my clock there? John, we saw yesterday that you had a couple of turtles. Do you have names for those turtles?
There are 35 of them, so it's
35. You have
How big is that tank?
Oh, no, there's more. There's eight ponds in the yard for a start. It's a little mini zoo here.
8 ponds?
Yeah.
So you don't have raccoons. See, in the United States, if you have anything like that, the raccoons eat them.
Not nice. No.
Raccoons eat turtles?
No.
Well, they eat anything, don't they?
I had a heron eating my goldfish the other day.
Oh, really?
Well, that makes sense.
Indeed, indeed.
What about wombats or something? Doesn't anything want to get at those turtles?
Little hard for them to get in the yard. Yeah, they're not too far away, wombats. But yeah, kangaroos and wombats, koalas, all those things.
Yeah.
They're all here.
Indeed. Speaking of here, we've got John Warby from Sydney. It's sunny there, I guess, huh? Milan from Prague. Hello, welcome. Gary Nuda from my old hometown, Chicago. Hello, Gary.
And Milan joins us every time. He is the president of the Czech Society.
Oh, well, welcome aboard. We got Karina from Mexico and Sergio from Mexico. Welcome. We are looking forward to today's talk about sunscreen and SPF testing. Got lots of great information from John, and we'll be getting started just in about 5 minutes. 5 minutes. We got Don from Lennox Head, Australia. Lennox Head, where's Lennox Head, John?
And it's almost 1 in the morning.
Nearly all the way to Brisbane. So you're talking about more 700 Ks from roughly. Is that right,
Wow.
Mr. Priest?
Roughly it is.
Send a message?
He can respond back in the chat,
Right.
so he probably sees that. We got Rizka from Indonesia.
Great.
Yeah, welcome. We got people all around the world, although less people usually from North America than usual, but it's a little later.
Well, and it's 1 in the morning in the Czech Republic. We didn't even include European times when we were setting this up. So he really wanted to watch you.
Well,
No pressure. No pressure.
we know it's going to be a good one, and we're going to get started in just 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes. Yeah. Mary Lynn, how are things in New York? Are you guys on a lockdown or restaurants?
We're getting there.
Yeah.
We're getting there. But Chicago, your restaurants have been closed for a couple weeks.
Closed them a couple weeks ago, yeah, but still get the takeout and stuff. But yeah, and actually, I went out to a restaurant a couple of days ago because you can sit outside. And let me tell you, I lasted for 1 beer and 1 tray of cheese curds before it got too cold. I mean, it was 38 degrees, but not a warm 38 either.
No.
And for you people in Celsius, I think that's about 3 degrees. See, that's right.
And John, and in Australia now it's what, 80 degrees or?
Yeah, around about 80s.
Yeah.
It's mid 20s today here.
Yeah.
A bit cooler. We have a south wind coming from Antarctica.
Oh, that'll do
But
it.
a long way. But
John, I'm curious. You guys are kind of close to Antarctica. Are there any ships that go right from Australia down to Antarctica, or does it all come from South America?
Only service ships and research vessels. But you can take a flight. You can take a Qantas flight.
Oh.
Yeah.
Really?
You don't land.
Oh.
You do an 8-hour loop.
Oh, nice.
Seriously?
Be an interesting trip.
Yep.
All right, we've got Pepe from Melbourne. Hello, Melissa from Istanbul. That must be pretty late in Istanbul too, right?
Oh, yeah. Wow,
Wanda, another person from Chicago. Well, we got a number of people checking in from Chicago. We're going to get started with the main presentation just in about 3 minutes. Welcome aboard, everybody. Thank you so much for attending. This is the IFSCC webinar. Actually, it's our 3rd week in a row we have this webinar going on. But this is the last webinar of 2020, and we're finishing up with one of our best speakers and most popular speakers, John Staton. When was the last one you did, John? Was that in
June? I think.
That's right, June. Yeah, it's back when I was in Florida, if I recall.
When you were a boy, huh?
Exactly, back in the day.
It's 3 a.m. in Istanbul, so Melissa really wants to hear this. John, this had better be good.
No pressure.
No pressure.
Nicole, hello, Nicole from New York.
Okay, I won't talk monotone.
Oh,
Sleep, huh?
All right, we are excited to have everybody here. Sophia from Korea. Okay, Marilyn, I think we're close enough to get started.
Okay.
Let's see. We're gonna get started first with the a little introduction. But first, if you're just coming on or this is your first webinar,
That the interpretation of the SPF results is based on an average of 10, and in your comparison of Lab A and Lab B, you will find results which are quite consistent between the two. In the next example, the SPF reports show the comparison of Lab A and Lab B.
all right, looks like John was having some technical issues there, so we'll get him back on hopefully momentarily. There you go. If you have any questions thus far, very interesting stuff going on. Hopefully John can come back on shortly. Give John a minute here to get back online shortly. This would be a good time to post your questions if you had some questions thus far. Since we do have the coming up IFSCC in Cancun coming up next year, and there is a call for papers. So if you are interested in doing a podium presentation or a poster, the Cancun conference call for papers closes in February. So make sure you submit your papers for that conference. Should be a good one. Hopefully we can have that as a live conference, but I'm sure there's going to be an online component also. We're just trying to get John back on. It's the vagaries of technology. We'll see what we can do.
Hi, this is Mary Lynn. So let's let Perry and John figure this out in the background. Thank you for submitting your questions. I wish I could answer them. As you guys know, I'm not a scientist. I'm the administrator. I make the trains run on time. We were talking to John as we were, before we flipped the switch to go live, and he has 35 turtles in his house, in a pond in his backyard, and he has a few in the room he's broadcasting from. There's actually a tank with a few turtles. And you might have noticed his shirt has a pattern on it, and those are little turtles. So I guess he's a turtle guy. So we're recording this. I'll cut all this boring stuff out, but we're recording this. We add a little slide at the beginning saying, welcome, and we do a few little magical editing things. And then I will upload it to our YouTube channel, and I'll send you guys a link. And that normally happens within about 24 hours. If you would like a copy of the slides, shoot me an email, and we'll get them to you. They will not be automatically included when you get my email tomorrow. So Perry, you're back, but
boring.
You're not done.
Boring. This isn't the boring part. This is the exciting part. The vagaries of technology. No, I haven't heard. Somehow John got cut out, and he hasn't been able to log back in just yet. But we're still trying, so hopefully we can get him back on shortly. There's Gavin coming on. But no John at the moment.
I think there's some sort of issue with Asia right now.
Are you saying the whole internet in Asia is going down?
I'm not saying that.
I'm not either. Well, let's see if we can get a hold of John.
Okay.
I just reconnected.
Is that so? You might be hearing.
Yes, that's Gavin. Gavin, you could turn on your camera if you like.
Gavin, show your... Right. There he is. That's Gavin Chung.
Hi, hello, everyone.
Gavin is a member of the Hong Kong Association, and he has tentatively raised his hand to help us with these. So he's here today to see the magic from behind the screen, behind the curtains.
Yes.
Gavin, are you in Hong Kong or are you in Tokyo?
I am actually currently in Hong Kong. Haven't been to Tokyo for a while already. The last time I was there was in March. Yes, been a while.
Oh boy, that's a long time.
Just so everyone knows, I just got a little update from our friends in Australia, and they said they are having some random outages in the Sydney area. So that could be one of the problems that we're having here. But as soon as we get John back, as soon as we get John back on, we'll get him to finish the rest of the talk. In the meantime, Gavin, now that you're here, tell us a little bit about yourself, Gavin. What's your connection with the cosmetic industry?
All right. I am a formulation chemist by professional training. And my background, back in the day I went to university, I grew up in Canada, in a remote part called Quebec, the only little French area in the Canadian or North American continent.
Sure.
Yes, and I did chemical engineering, and just by a turn of luck, I got into cosmetic industry, and I've been working in Asia in particular for managing factory lab, and then doing a lot of hand productions, as well as formulation working lab, and I'm part of the Hong Kong Society of Cosmetic Chemists, where I'm also doing education as well, helping university in particular to have courses that is specialized in cosmetic science, which is a bit rare in the Hong Kong and China region, where universities specialize in that area or have discipline that dedicated to that kind of course. So we are helping with that, and also bring in and bridge different professionals from other countries to have a talk and to learn about the industry here as well. So it's been a very journeyful 10 years been in the industry.
Wow.
Yes, it's been 10 years. Yes, it's been wonderful. And also another good point, the first ever education material I ever learned from You know who's it from? None other than Perry himself.
I'm watching that.
What was it?
I remember it was an online course.
Yes, I've done the course for a while. Yeah.
Wow.
And
So he's responsible for getting you into this industry? He's the guilty party?
Correct. Well, he was inspiration, I would say. He
Wow.
was an inspiration. And it was a very funny turn of event as well for that class, because it wasn't me who was supposed to take that online class, because one of my senior signed up for it, but she didn't want to do it. So I was shadowing that class. So I did the whole class and the whole exam.
Wow,
So
excellent.
that was back 10 years. Yeah. So it's good. It's good.
Wow.
So,
That's great.
yeah, it's very, very, very funny turn of events, in fact.
Well, I'm looking at the clock. If we have the outage for much longer, what we can do is get John on when we have a time, and we'll record the entire presentation, and so we'll have that as a replay. But as of now, we'll still wait to give him a chance to get back on. I've tried to connect with him via emails, but I haven't got any contact back. So we're just gonna keep on keeping on. You know, speaking of Hong Kong, which is a fabulous city, I visited there some number of years ago. But I thought you go up that big mountain and you can see the top of all the skyscrapers, and there's a little bay that you go across, and you can have tea at the Peninsula Hotel. I had high tea and watched the lasers. They have that laser show, right?
Yes, indeed. Well, there are the main attraction to the Victoria Peak. I would say, like in terms of skyline, you can see a lot in different cities, in New York, Tokyo,
Chicago.
Chicago. But rarely that you do have a skyline that you see from a natural mountain and not from an observatory.
Mm-hmm.
And then also have a very densely lit side on both sides. So it's a very, very, very condensed city, which is one of the most densely populated city in the world. On top of that is based on the whole history, there's a lot of different people that is gathering in Hong Kong. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, we have one of the largest French expats in Asia. In terms of numbers in Hong Kong. So that is one interesting thing. And that is a very lively city, despite all been happening lately. But the whole situation right now with the COVID, no one can really visit, but that's why we're here on the webinar. So, and how about you, Perry? How are you doing?
Well, I'm good. We're here in Chicago, and everything's kind of locked down. In where I'm located, the cases of COVID keep going up, so they're trying to stop that. But of course, United States, everyone gets together on the holidays, even if they're not supposed to. So go figure.
Well, I think it's the same everywhere on the globe. That's why we have this outbreak, right? People just need to get together, even though virtually or in person. We just need to. We
are social animals, right? Just one more thing back on the Hong Kong market. I'm not familiar with the cosmetic industry in Hong Kong. You guys have a Hong Kong SCC, but what kind of companies are in Hong Kong as cosmetic producers?
In Hong Kong, since it's only a special administrative regions as part of China, so we are in a little particular spot for that. In Hong Kong, is quite a free for all kind of market. So in terms of producer, there's not that many. They're one of the president of the Hong Kong Society, Elaine Chan. Her company is probably one of the leading manufacturers in Hong Kong, but manufacturing is not a big thing in Hong Kong. A lot of brand would have their marketing office here. So all the conglomerates we know of, they would have their marketing office here. L'Oreal have a pretty big office here. But one thing is very, very particular, as I talk about, is a free-for-all kind of market, is because we all understand that cosmetic is highly regulated, more in different countries, in Europe, in US. There have a very specific kind of rule to follow for safety. But in Hong Kong is a bit experimental in such a way that there is no clear regulations for products. Whatever you import into Hong Kong is a bit like in a free port, a duty-free zone, where you could pretty much import anything. But obviously, there's also area that is the same everywhere on the globe for a cosmetic product not to have medical claims or therapeutic claim. Yeah. That is true. But other than that, it's a very, very, very easy to navigate kind of market. So there's no NT listing.
Oh, really?
Required? No, there's not required. No, even country of origin is not also required. So Procter & Gamble, for their range of shampoo and personal care, you actually don't see they write any NT listing, any country of origin, and just their company name, pretty much.
Wow.
That's interesting. Now, I'm curious about this topic that we're talking about today, sunscreens. In the United States, a sunscreen is classified as an over-the-counter drug, so it's a little more tightly regulated than most cosmetics. What's the regulation status of sunscreens in Hong Kong? Are they considered cosmetics or are they drugs? Or somewhere in between?
Somewhere in between, more like a cosmetic than drug, because drug in Hong Kong still required a registration like most regular drug would. But sunscreen, being a product to protect you, don't really fall into the category of drugs. So we don't have a registration kind of system to regulate the product. However, I believe that we do have a consumer protection agency, which would irregularly, by chance, to test out different product. We actually had in this year, actually in 2020, they did a reporting on sunscreen, which they sample over 50 different sunscreen based on their price point and also the claim SPF. And in fact, it turned out, based on their set of testing, is some of them do not reach the number which is labeled on the product. And for that is violating the basic rule of any product in Hong Kong. Basically, you cannot have misleading label on product. So I think a lot of brands kind of scramble to defend themselves for that. And also, because sunscreen is there's a wide range of testing could be possibly done based on different methods and also different batch. Sometimes there's differences. So the number, when it turned out to be not favorable and it broadcast by such non-government agency, consumer are more skeptical about them. And even though some of the brand would bring up their own report doing retesting and stuff like that, it would be very, very damaging for the brand. So it's very, very important for the brand to do more than one type of testing to be able to support their claims.
Yeah, that is wow. That is true. It seems like there's regulations around the world. There are really two things that everybody agrees on. One is that you can't produce unsafe products, and and two, you can't lie about your products.
Absolutely, you cannot lie about your product. That would be very similar in Taiwan as well in terms of regulations. So you cannot overclaim what you write. Basically what you do, even they don't have a very clear regulation as well. It's not as strict. Whereas in China, I think some of you in the people who attend this webinar is in the morning here, so they may from China do fall into the special category of product, which they have a very long lead time for registration in order to have a approved sunscreen product in the market.
You know, since we do have you on and you know about the China market, I'm curious about animal testing and
hot topic.
Is that something that's a concern? Is that brands have to do animal testing to get into the China market, or is that just kind of a myth or something?
Well, in fact, right now it's still required in a way that is part of the safety assessment when you go through. It's not entirely clear or very transparent, the test they do, because they do assessment based on the formulation you provide, and then they would do testing based on what they think is necessary. But at this stage, I think for the past year, a lot of news, rumors, and then also some of our members from the Hong Kong Society participate in the discussion and actually putting new kind of safety assessment. But so far, the new assessment are not entirely in place yet. So for brands who like to import their product, they still might face animal testing at this point. It's been kind of on and off. So a lot of brands still very hesitant about it, since the trend is going toward no animal testing.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, Mary Lynn and I were working on a, let's see. Sorry, I am just looking at John here. He's got back in contact. I got to send him the link again. But Mary Lynn and I were working on doing a, what do you call it? A webinar, panel discussion on animal testing.
Yes.
So yeah, look for that in 2021. And speaking of that, if you guys have ideas for webinars, topics that you want to see covered, please let us know. Put it in the chat there, and we'll try to get experts who can come on. I'm looking forward to the first one that we have in January, which is going to be our first ever debate on the topic of clean beauty. We've got two PhD scientists. One on the side that clean beauty leads to better products, and one on the side that clean beauty is just a marketing fluff. So we'll see where that ends up. And what I like about that, I don't think I've seen anything else like that anywhere in the cosmetic industry. And so you get kind of unique things here at the IFSCC webinars.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. There's a new one. There's a really good topic to debate on. I know that really heated, I'm sure.
We're going to try to keep it civil. We're going to see.
Right.
Here's Annalisa says she'd love to see a webinar on sustainability. Yeah, another great topic, sustainability. Mm-hmm. And like I said, I just heard from John, so he might come back on. Let's see. Resend the link. Hopefully I sent that link to him. And hopefully he hops back on. So
I know the IFSCC magazine is putting together in 2021 an issue on sustainability. So it'll be interesting to see what they come up with.
Yeah, it's a challenging topic, I think, because we are in the business of selling more and more product. And right. The easiest way to be sustainable is to just stop selling. Do you really need to use shampoo every day? I mean,
do you really need to rinse and repeat?
I don't know. But, of course, I'm not sure. I do wonder, like, how does sustainability sort of coincide with capitalism? It's a challenge right there.
I think one of the item that is probably a lot of formulator face these days is the anhydrous or the waterless kind of formulation. I mean, you could sell basically the same number of product, but just a bit less on your transportation costs. It could be a good point to start.
Yeah,
but I think for that as well, I think a lot of people do ask this question because it's a bit more novelty in terms of things that we see these days.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Gavin, you have joined us, and let's see what we got here from John. Cookie issue. Try.
I think it's those darn turtles. I think they chewed through some cabling in the yard, and that's our problem.
Can you hear me now?
Oh,
yes.
He's back.
Yes.
Yeah, there we go. John, welcome. We got to turn your camera on if you can.
Okay.
And there we are. We're back.
So where did we get to?
Well, we got to. Let me call your slides back up. But welcome. Hopefully everything's good there. I'll start you back up here. Oh, looks like we might still be where you were. How about there?
No, previous to that, I think.
Okay, we'll go a little quicker. He hopped out again. We'll start here. Okay. John was gone, and then he was back, and now he's gone again. Well, Gavin, this is new for us, but this is great training for when you are the moderator. There might be some technical issues.
I feel like the first time on this, there's already a pretty good experience for me.
He was back briefly and gone away.
I'm glad to get these questions now, though, because it's just good to get feedback right away from everyone.
I like to pretend I don't wear glasses, so I'm going to put mine in so I can read what's going on.
Yeah.
But I don't like the glare, you can see my lighting here.
I have been told I'm supposed to get glasses that don't have glare, but all glasses have glare. And I know you're going to say get the anti-glare coating, but still, when you're in front of these strong lights like Perry is, it's...
No, I'm not going to say get the anti-glare coating because I'm going to say that's probably just marketing gobbledygook.
Well, it does help a little bit. But for sure. But I think the best fix for that is actually not about the glasses. It's actually get the lighting right for your webinar. So now they come up with all these new gadgets, have like diffuse light and make you look very perfect on a webcam.
There you go, perfect.
There's also new natural light right now for me.
Yeah,
not me. It's pitch black out there.
It is right.
Although I get to see Saturn and Jupiter, they're getting closer and closer in the sky every day.
Oh.
Yeah, indeed. Looks like John has not been able to reconnect. We'll give him a little more time. We've got 10 more. We'll stay on for 10 more minutes. But we are going to. We'll arrange with John again. We'll record something, so we make sure it's a little more reliable here. I don't know what's going on in Australia, but probably a solar flare or something. Mary Lynn, I just made that up, so you sounded like
it's the turtles.
Very believable, Perry. You sound very believable.
If you say
it's the turtles,
say anything with enough conviction, it could be anything.
What happened to all of our people joining from Australia? We haven't heard from anybody in a minute or two on chat. Anybody from Australia here?
Well,
Fabrizio saying it's okay. All right.
Everything's good in Melbourne.
All right.
I have not made it to Melbourne. I made it to Sydney and Canberra.
You gave a talk there, didn't you?
I did. Yeah. And I got to visit a couple of years ago. And Sydney was a wonderful city. I wish I could have made it to Melbourne. Did not quite make it there.
Oh, we got people here from Sydney. Okay. It's just John's neighborhood.
Yeah. Like you said, it's the turtles.
The turtles.
Turtles or the wombats there. Gavin, when I was in Hong Kong, I I walked. I took the little tram up to the top of that mountain, and then I walked all the way down. And about halfway down, there is like a zoo or something. I remember all of these wonderful birds. Do you know what zoo I'm talking about?
Yes, we have tiny zoo. And
Yeah.
let's not tell people that we have zoo over there.
Oh, well, there are all these wonderful, wonderful, colorful birds that I had never seen before.
Yes, it's quite a nice area to be in. And I know that you like jogging
I
and you
do.
like running. Yes, right?
That's me, yeah,
Yes.
every day.
Yes, yes. In Hong Kong, there do have a, let's say, because the city is quite old in some area, where the tram will go on the Victoria Peak. When you go down, we have all these like older houses, older garden, and with the zoo. And that zoo in particular, or the bird that you see, is a big bird cage basically. And then you just walk inside, you feel like tropical forest kind of feeling.
Yeah.
It's really nice. It's a beautiful place to be in. But just 50 meters further than you're in the big buildings and stuff. It's just
Yes.
very, very high contrast.
To tell you how I'm actually a terrible traveler, but the reason I went to Hong Kong, I was in Shenzhen at a conference in Shenzhen, and I saw that Hong Kong was just a 2-hour train ride away, and I said, I've got to go to Hong Kong.
Right.
So I went there, and I took the train there. Then when I got to Hong Kong, you take the train there, and you go to like some main station, and then you got to get downtown Hong Kong. And I said, well, I want a ticket to Hong Kong, and the lady said, well, what stop? I don't know, Hong Kong? Well, there does happen to be a stop called Hong Kong. So
Correct.
Yeah, I was very lucky because it was downtown.
Oh, good.
Yes, it was central, which is really the center of the financial district. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, for people who haven't yet had a chance to come to Hong Kong, or next time you plan to visit China and stop by Hong Kong because of the flight arrangement, then there's a train, or there's a speed train now that go directly from downtown area, the West Kowloon area, and it go to Shenzhen or Guangzhou, which is really a major concentration of factories inside China. Around 50% by numbers of manufacturers inside China are all located in this region. All right.
Wow.
Seems like 10 minutes.
we got John back on.
Hi, sorry, I don't know what happened there.
Well,
it's the vagaries of technology. If you want to hit your camera button up there, top left, a little circle. Get back on. There you go, John. Well, John, we got 5 minutes. we got. Let's see where we are here. I believe we're about here. Makes sense?
Let's go back a bit. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about in terms of interpreting the SPF results from actual life